History was just made, and almost no network covered it live, as South Africa presented its genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. And I'm going to help here break down what happened. So, this is a lot of what was discussed in this 3.5 hour presentation has been discussed on this channel, on other networks, other channels for the past few months in terms of what Israel has clearly been committing against Palestinians. This is also making history in a sense, as this is just the second time a country has taken another country to the ICJ on behalf of a third country. So because Palestine is not in the UN, they cannot take this case to the UN directly themselves. South Africa, which has a history of apartheid, were the ones to lead this charge and has the support of many other countries behind them. So first, before I get to some clips from the presentation and a bit of a breakdown here, just it's important to understand the scope, or maybe even the lack thereof, in terms of the actual implications of this. So from the BBC here, the ICJ is the UN's highest court based in The Hague in the Netherlands. Its rulings are theoretically legally binding on parties to the ICJ, which include Israel and South Africa, but are not enforceable. In 2022, the court ordered Russia to immediately suspend military operations in Ukraine, an order that was ignored. So the actual ramifications of, let's say the court finds that, yes, Israel is committing genocide. The actual impact of that is unclear, and the ruling is likely not going to come down for a year or so, at least based on past rulings and how long that's taken. But there are some there's an attempt here for immediate measures to be implemented or to tell Israel to take, and again, they're unlikely to follow any of it. But unlike the International Criminal Court, the ICJ cannot prosecute individuals for crimes such as genocide, but its opinions carry weight with the UN and other international institutions. So again, the actual implications are unclear, but there's sort of a general idea here that it may have some impact on Israel. And as The Guardian writes, it could take the court years to make a ruling, but it could also issue provisional measures requiring actions like a ceasefire to mitigate the risk of genocide. The Israeli government could ignore the measures, but to do so would cause enormous reputational harm and loss of influence on the world stage for Israel and its principal backer, the U.S. I question this. There already is reputational harm from what Israel is doing and what the U.S. is doing and supporting it and what the U.S. has done in the past. I would be surprised if Israel would support a ceasefire just because the UN decides, or that this court decides, what Israel is doing is wrong. I would be shocked. So let me get to the first clip here. And the full thing is online on the UN. You can see it here. It's this 4 hours long, but there's breaks in between. Here's the first clip I want to show you. So this is actually from later into the stream, but it's Max Dupuis, an associate professor of law at the University of KwaZulu-Natal and a senior research associate at the International Crimes in Africa program at the Institute for Security Studies. A long tagline there, but the reason I want to show you this first is because this to me really helps you understand that this is a legal argument here. This is not about spectacle. This is not about shocking people. This is about making the legal case that Israel is clearly committing genocide.
In the speeches to this court today, South Africa has chosen, as you've heard, to avoid the showing of graphic videos and photos. It has decided against turning this court into a theatre for spectacle. It knows, as well as your excellencies, the temptation for both sides in a dispute to parade pictures to shock. But South Africa's application in this court today is built on a foundation of clear legal rights, not images. The detailed material before the court is marshalled to show a case for provisional measures based firmly on this court's prior decisions, and South Africa advances its case on the basis that Palestinians' rights are equally as worthy of protection on the unprecedented evidence before you as those of the victim groups that this honourable court has previously protected by its issuance of provisional measures in the past.
All right. So the reason why this is so important, why it's so important that South Africa is not relying on images or videos, but instead a legal case for why Israel is committing genocide, is because it is very likely that Israel is going to try and use shocking imagery and shocking stories for why they should be allowed to commit genocide against Palestinians. South Africa here is making the legal case of why Israel is clearly violating the Genocide Convention. Israel has no actual legal defense. There is no defense of what they're doing, clearly. How can you defend killing 20,000 civilians, half of them children, because of what Hamas did? How can you justify creating worse terror attacks, committing worse terror attacks because a terrorist attack was committed against you? There's no justification for what Israel is doing, and that's just discussing post-October 7th. Let's not also forget what's been happening for decades and how Israel controls Palestinians in two occupied territories. Not to mention the separate laws, depending on if you're Palestinian or if you're Israeli within Israel. So there's a whole. Again, this case was presented over 4 hours. It's impossible for me to properly summarize all of that in this short video, but I'll do my best. I'll get to the next clip here. So first to present this, as the BBC writes here, South Africa has been highly critical of Israel's military operation in Gaza, and its governing African National Congress has a long history of solidarity with the Palestinian cause. It sees parallels with its struggle against apartheid, a policy of racial segregation and discrimination enforced by the white minority government in South Africa against the country's black majority until the first democratic elections in 1994. So, of course, South Africa has a long history with apartheid, finally defeating that struggle and overcoming it. And this is why they are the perfect country, the perfect state here to present this case to the ICJ.
South Africa has recognized the ongoing Nakba of the Palestinian people through Israel's colonization since 1948, which has systematically and forcibly dispossessed, displaced, and fragmented the Palestinian people, deliberately denying them their internationally recognized inalienable right to self-determination and their internationally recognized right of return as refugees to their towns and villages in what is now the State of Israel. We are also particularly mindful of Israel's institutionalized regime of discriminatory laws, policies and practices designed and maintained to establish domination, subjecting the Palestinian people to apartheid on both sides of the Green Line. South Africa acknowledges that the genocidal acts and omissions by the State of Israel inevitably form part of a continuum of illegal acts perpetrated against the Palestinian people since 1948.
All right, so this establishes at the outset, this is the first presentation, the first speaker for South Africa, Vusimuzi Mendosela, discussing that this is not simply about the recent events, though it is about the recent events, but that there's a history, a long history here of domination by the right-wing Israeli government against Palestinians, including checkpoints, land dispossession, legal discrimination when hiring in some cities. This is an ongoing fight, an ongoing domination of the Israeli government against Palestinians. And I've discussed some of this in the past. This is a recent video, or from October at least. I discussed this is just one example of the discriminatory laws that was brought up there in that video. This is Israeli checkpoints. So a little more on that here. And by the way, I'll link to this below in case you want to see it, but you also search that title up and you'll find the video. But some images here from these checkpoints that are all over the occupied territories. This is if Palestinians want to work, want to be able to provide for their families, they have to go through these checkpoints every single day to and from work, packed in like sardines, going through these military checkpoints just to be able to provide for their families. So as Al Jazeera writes here, there are more than 700 road obstacles across the West Bank, including 140 checkpoints. These checkpoints severely limit Palestinian freedom of movement. While Palestinians may have to wait for hours at these checkpoints and travel along segregated road networks, Israelis can travel freely on their own bypass roads, which have been built on Palestinian land to connect illegal Israeli settlements to major metropolitan areas inside Israel. So in case you're thinking, well, to get across the border in any country, you got to go through, these, not checkpoints, but you have to go through immigration or whatever. Israelis don't. They freely move on their own roads. This is clearly a separation of a clearly discriminatory laws put in place. This isn't simply the way, Palestinians may be treated culturally. No, this is legal discrimination based on if you are Palestinian or if you are not. And presenting the next video here. So this case, there's, as they discuss in the presentation, there are many articles that Israel is likely violating, but they wanted to focus on the presentation on just a few. Otherwise, their presentation here could have taken days. But as Common Dreams writes, Israel has forced the displacement of about 85% of Palestinians in Gaza. There is nowhere safe for them to flee to. And Hassim, which is lawyer Adila Hassim, who I'm going to show you the clip of in a second, made the case that Israel is guilty of violating Articles 2A, 2B, 2C, and 2D of the Genocide Convention, which defines genocide as harm inflicted, quote, with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. And just to be clear on these articles, here it is straight from the Geneva Conventions, Article 2. So you have, again, they presented A, B, C, and D. So A, killing members of the group. B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. And D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. They presented a case for each of these. And I'm going to show you just one clip from Adila Hassim's presentation.
Following 7 October, Israel deployed 6,000 bombs per week. At least 200 times, it has deployed 2,000-pound bombs in southern areas of Palestine designated as safe. These bombs have also decimated the north, including refugee camps. 2,000-pound bombs are some of the biggest and most destructive bombs available. They are dropped by lethal fighter jets that are used to strike targets on the ground by one of the world's most resourced armies. Israel has killed an unparalleled and unprecedented number of civilians, with the full knowledge of how many civilian lives each bomb will take. More than 1,800 families, Palestinian families in Gaza, have lost multiple family members, and hundreds of multi-generational families have been wiped out, with no remaining survivors. Mothers, fathers, children, siblings, grandparents, aunts, cousins, often all killed together. This killing is nothing short of destruction of Palestinian life. It is inflicted deliberately. No one is spared, not even newborn babies. The scale of Palestinian child killings in Gaza is such that UN chiefs have described it as a graveyard for children. The devastation, we submit, is intended to and has laid waste to Gaza beyond any acceptable legal, let alone humane, justification.
It's important to point out here that if you have followed this conflict at all, none of this is new information to you. None of what was presented is new information. But what South Africa is doing here is presenting the obvious legal case for why Israel is committing genocide, bringing all the information together of what we've seen over the past few months and prior to that, and presenting the case that clearly Israel is committing genocide. And to see this case finally made and presented the way it's been presented through, this legal means, and done so with the backing of professionals and experts in the field, it really it showcases that there is no doubt. There was never any doubt before. But for there to still be any sort of debate internationally, and I'm speaking really directly to Israel and its supporters, like the US, Canada, the UK, for there to be any debate at all about what is going on is just to ignore objective reality. When you see numbers like this, CNN World has thankfully kept updating this graph, as I've showed this many times now. But this is death toll in the conflict over the past 15 years. You can see here that the latest violence as of 2023, 1,200 deaths in Israel, compared to at least 22,185 in Gaza as of January 2nd. The disproportionate response, disproportionate is an understatement. The reaction that Israel has made here to what happened on October 7th is unprecedented. And again, half of those children, half of them children. What is the justification for this? There isn't one. It's going to be very interesting, to say the least, to see what Israel is going to do to try and defend their actions here. Some last points. South Africa's presenters sought to demonstrate genocidal intent in part by directly quoting high-ranking Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This is a quote from one of the presenters for South Africa. Quote, Israel's political leaders, military commanders, and persons holding official positions have systematically and in explicit terms declared their genocidal intent. These statements are then repeated by soldiers on the ground in Gaza as they engage in the destruction of Palestinians and the physical infrastructure of Gaza. So it's not even just what clearly Israel is doing to Gaza and to Palestinians. It's also in their words, including what the Prime Minister is saying the intent of what they're doing is. Yet here is U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and this is I'm not sure I'll show you the full thing. Maybe I'll jump around, but I want to show you just a bit of this, because he goes from saying that this case is meritless, what South Africa is saying is meritless, yet then goes on to cite exactly one of the ways that Israel is committing genocide.
We believe the submission against Israel to the International Court of Justice distracts the world from all of these important efforts. And moreover, the charge of genocide is meritless. On this trip, I came to Israel after meeting with the leaders of Turkey, Greece, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. All of those leaders share our concern about the spread of the conflict. All of them are committed to using their influence, using the ties that they have to prevent it from escalating, to deter new from opening. In addition, all express great concern about the dire humanitarian situation and the number of civilians killed in Gaza. We know that facing an enemy that embeds itself among civilians, who hides in and fires from schools, from hospitals, makes this incredibly challenging. But the daily toll on civilians in Gaza, particularly on children, is far too high. Important progress has been made in increasing the amount of aid getting into Gaza, including by opening Kerem Shalom. Nonetheless, 90% of Gaza's population continues to face acute food insecurity, according to the United Nations.
First of all, let's address his defense of what Israel is doing, because Hamas hides itself among the population, which is this ongoing bullshit. Is it legal for let's say there is I'm trying to avoid YouTube catching algorithm here with the words I'm using, but let's say there is an event happening at a school and you want to stop said event. There's a mass crazy person at a school. Does the military go in and just bomb it? Well, we had to get the guy who's doing it. He may have left the school and got other people. No, clearly you don't do that. So why is it perfectly okay for the right-wing Israeli government to drop bombs on civilians in order to get what they perceive as the threat? It is just, you have to be incredibly fucking stupid to buy any of this bullshit. To think, to be an objective observer in this conflict, and to think that anything that Israel's trying to sell you is making any sense. In no other context is it okay to get a bunch of civilians to get one person. No other context is that perfectly acceptable. Yet the U.S. is doing it here. They think it's perfectly fine. And of course, Anthony Blinken, let's be clear, he knows he's full of shit. He is attempting here to maintain a relationship with the right-wing Israeli government. And he may, in his mind, he may think, well, this is the only way to make them do the right thing. But if that's the case, is it working? Is it working? You have to put actual pressure on your partners. You have to risk, or you have to threaten to pull support from Israel for them to attempt to stop to do anything. Or not threaten to pull support. Pull support. Stop funding them. Stop supporting them. At that point, they're going to have to stop. There's no justification for any of this. It's very clear, and it's also incredibly clear that countries like the U.S. continue supporting this genocide, meaning they themselves are also guilty by association here, because they're the ones not even just supporting it, not even just, allowing it to happen. They are helping to fund it. They are sending the bombs needed to commit what is being committed. They are directly involved in this. Last thing, just so we know the world's not crazy, a growing number of national governments are backing South Africa, including Brazil, Malaysia, Bolivia, and Pakistan. South Africa's ICJ effort has also drawn massive support from grassroots organizations across the globe. Quote, Israel's killing, injuring, traumatizing, and displacing large numbers of Palestinians and denying water, food, medicine, and fuel to an occupied population meet the criteria for the crime of genocide, reads an open letter signed by more than 1,000 unions, popular movements, and other groups. Quote, if a majority of the world's nations call for a ceasefire, yet failed to press for prosecution of Israel, what is to stop Israel from ethnically cleansing all Palestinians?